Good evening, my friends, and happy weekend. Welcome back to The Criminal Spud, where we explore some true crime in a short and informal way. Please be mindful that the content covered may be upsetting or even disturbing for some of you. So, if there was ever a story that really required that warning, trust me, tonight's story is that story. So if this is not your jam, or if you're just not in the headspace today, then that is absolutely a-okay. Go ahead and press skip. But do check out my main channel, The Sofa Spud Reviews, for something lighter and much less stabby. On the other hand, if you do enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing so that I know whether or not to make more videos like this. Now, tonight's case is from Poland, and can I just say, whoa. I'm shocked for two reasons, okay? So I'm shocked at the horrific subject matter of the story we're about to talk about. But I'm also shocked that I've never heard of this case up until a week ago, because I'm a huge horror movie buff. And this one is literally Silence of the Lambs. So for anyone who's seen Silence of the Lambs, this story is going to sound very familiar to you guys. And it only happened about 8 years after this movie came out. So who knows, maybe it touched some psychopath deep down and it inspired them to go out and commit an absolutely heinous act on another human person. But I have been going down a rabbit hole online for the last week, trying to find out as much as I could about this story, because apart from it being straight out of a horror movie, I'm not fully convinced that they've caught the true killer based on the information that I was able to find. And a lot of the articles, obviously it happened in Poland, so a lot of the articles and the videos about it are in Polish. And I was able to translate some of the articles quite easily. Thank you, modern technology. You go onto a website and you just press auto translate. But some of the videos, not so much. And actually, I will tell you a very true story. Last weekend was when I discovered this case. Well, early last weekend. And I was going down this rabbit hole and I texted one of my friends. We were just organising a day to meet up to go and have drinks. And she happens to be Polish. And I said to her, I sent her a link to a video that was in Polish language. And I said, how in all of the years that we've known each other and we've talked about true crime documentaries on Netflix, how have you never mentioned this case to me, knowing that I'm such a weirdo and love this stuff? And I asked her, do you guys have a central website like courts.ie that we have here, where you can just pull court cases and transcripts and you can read the trial, transcripts? And after a very long wait for a response, the conversation kind of just, dropped off a cliff at that point. But I will read you her response to me verbatim. My love, you need to let us set you up with some nice guy. This is not a way to live. P.S. Are we going to IKEA on Thursday? And is this why you were asking about sewing machines last week? I worry about you. Kiss face emoji. So no, it is not why I was asking about sewing machines. I was just in the market for a new hobby. But without further ado, this is the case of Katarzyna Zowada. So let's journey back to 1998, winter of 1998. Kate Winslet is being drawn like one of Jack's French girls. Monica Lewinsky is signing her book deal, and Cher was telling us all to believe. Meanwhile, Katarzyna, or Kasia as we're going to refer to her in this case, was a college student in Krakow. She's 23 years old. She's studying and she's working one or two little side jobs, just cash in hand, nothing unusual. And what we need to know about Kasia at this point is that she's going through a hell of a hard time. She has recently lost her father, and it was in a really sudden, tragic way. They had an accident while they were out hiking, and I say we, yes, she was there, she witnessed it. So that is a massive curveball to be thrown in life for anybody. And she was really struggling with her mental health. She was being treated at this point for depression. And she was naturally quite introverted and withdrawn anyway. She always kind of kept to herself. She had those few chosen ones, that she was friends with from very, very early years. But she didn't necessarily have a big, large support network of friends around her. Now, her mother was quite close with her and she was actively supporting her and participating in her road to recovery. And she was attending some of her psychiatrist sessions with her. And yeah, look, recovery with any kind of mental health issue, it's not linear. We know that for anyone who has gone through depression, we know that it's not linear. You have your good days, you have your bad days. And Kasia was, she was making some drastic changes to her appearance. She was withdrawing, she was skipping a lot of classes at college. But she was trying, okay? So that's the main thing. She was trying. And I think sometimes when you're naturally an introverted person and you're struggling with your mental health, going to a therapy session is the hardest thing in the world. So she was being super brave, in my opinion. She was taking steps to get better. But then one morning, she was due to attend a session with her mum, and they were due to meet outside of this hospital and go in together. But Kasia just never showed up. Which, if any of us were in Kasia's mother's shoes, what would you do? You would worry, you would freak out. Of course you would, because your child, you know they're struggling with their mental health. You know that they're depressed and that they have been actively engaging with their therapy, but then they just stand you up. They don't show up. Like, no call, no message, nothing. So Kasia's mother goes to the police and she reports this pretty much immediately because she knows as a mother that just something is not right, something is off. And suffice to say, there was no big manhunt deployed for Kasia immediately. They kind of just told her mother, go home, try and stay calm, try and relax. She's a 23-year-old college student. She's going to come home. She will show up. She will turn up eventually. They always do. So there was absolutely no notable sense of urgency. They weren't out combing the area that same evening. It took almost a week for them to really start picking up momentum and treating her like a true missing person. And that was kind of it. That was the last anyone saw of Kasia. She just disappeared into thin air one November morning in 1998. And then November passes, Christmas comes and goes, we ring in the new year, and we get all the way up to January the 6th of 99. And it is a bitter, cold, gloomy, dark weather evening. And there's these two guys. They've been out on the Vistula River all day and they're coming back into port on this little tugboat. And it's been one of those days. It's long. It's a public holiday as well. So they're obviously keen to get home, get warmed up as quickly as they can. And just as they're docking, their turbine on the boat is, kind of slowing down, coming to a stop. And they just feel and hear this chugga 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 chug, and they feel something disrupt the turbine. And it's kind of like, oh, for fuck's sake, of course, 2 minutes from the day being over, and there's probably some rubbish bag that's after being dumped by some inconsiderate a-hole, and now it's wrapped up in our turbine, and God knows what it is. But it's dark, it's freezing, so they kind of say, you know what, mañana, that's tomorrow's problem, and they go home. So the next morning they get down to the boat and they open up this hatch to get down and, investigate what the hell it is that got caught in their turbine and figure out if this is just something they can unravel themselves and hopefully fix, or is it going to be a bigger job? And it looks as though there's some kind of sheet of something, some kind of clothing or garment like twisted up in the turbine. And it's wound in there, like it's in there bad. So they're pulling little bits of waterlogged fabric and just throwing it on the dock. And then they get a grip of like the bulk of this material, and they manage to carefully and slowly like tease it out of the turbine without breaking it. And it's like this weird spongy white leathery kind of texture, like a sheet of this rubber, and it's almost in the shape of a vest or swimsuit. It's kind of like, the bodysuit that goes under in between your legs, but it's made out of this thick, almost thermal type material. But then on closer inspection, there's something sticking out of this bodysuit. And when they look at it, it's an earring, like a hoop earring. And then suddenly the entire garment comes into sharp focus. And the guy holding the bodysuit, he kind of drops it. He drops this thing and he falls backwards because he suddenly realized that this is a suit made of human skin. And this earring is attached to a stretched out, very weathered human ear. He can make out the shape of what were at one point human breasts. It is a waterlogged sheet of human skin. So police are called and forensics come in and they dredge the area and they find some partial remains, some additional pieces of a female from what they can gather. And there was never any question, did this turbine do this? Was there a person in the water, or was there maybe an already deceased person who had been dumped in the water and the turbine caused the skin to be torn from the person attached to it? No, absolutely not. That was not even a consideration because it was very clear from looking at this sheet of skin that it had been very deliberately and very expertly measured, cut and sewn. It was deliberately removed from a human and it was tailored into an item of clothing. So yeah, it was not your run-of-the-mill murder and dismemberment. This was something far, far worse. And as I mentioned, by this time it had been accepted that Kasia was in fact a missing person. So they were able to positively identify these remains as belonging to Kasia, which I don't know how her mother ever got through that. I don't know how the police officer sat her down and explained that to her. I don't know how that conversation would have even started. There's always going to be conversations that you wish you never have to have in life, but there's also conversations that you never imagine that you would have to have in life. And certainly this had to have been one of them. So I have no idea how anybody could have gotten through delivering that news to a mother. And I wonder, would it have been less painful to just have never found her? Like, how do you deal with that? But yeah, sorry friends, I know this is heavy, but let's get through it. So the local authorities, they called in experts from all over, and there were a few people of interest early on. Now, it was all circumstantial evidence. There was no hardcore forensics, but the post-mortem that they were able to conduct on the parts of Kasia that they had revealed some horrifying clues as to how she met her end. And it did help to create a basic profile. But remember, it's 1999. Forensics were nowhere near the level that they are today. But they could clearly gauge that this was absolutely no amateur. There was a certain level of skill involved. This was somebody who was obviously very sadistic. There had been sections of her body and her upper torso in particular that had been flayed. I can't believe I've just used that word in a sentence, but yes, there had been sections of her body that had been flayed and sewn into a suit of human skin. And she had been cut with surgical precision along these areas. And there was also some puncture wounds, kind of strategically inflicted as if to bleed her out. And it seemed to appear that that's what caused her death ultimately. So it was a very torturous, very merciless way to end someone's life. Not that there's any good way to do it, but out of all the ways that I've come across in my true crime, even in horror movies, this is right up there. And like I mentioned, they had a few persons of interest, which is concerning in and of itself, isn't it? Because not only did they have one person who could have possibly fit this profile in a small area, where Kasia worked and went to school and went about her day to day. No, there wasn't just one. There were multiple people who actually fit that profile potentially, this kind of monstrous profile. And I just think if you were living in that area or anywhere near that area at that time, could you imagine how scary that would be? I'd say you were up having nightmares every night. So anyway, for the purposes of our chat today, we'll narrow it down to two main suspects, okay? So the first person of interest, shall we say, is Robert. Now, Robert was like just a local creep. He used to spy on women. He used to send weird letters to women. He used to follow them around and kind of skulk in the night. And he had been seen visiting Kasia's grave numerous times, and lighting candles and staying there for an unsettling length of time, despite the fact that he denied ever knowing Kasia. So yeah, straight away, red flag, whether he's guilty or not. That's probably something to look into. But they quickly moved away from Robert because Vladimir came to their attention. So a couple of months after Kasia's body had been found, this guy called Vladimir was brought into custody, having committed a very heinous and eerily similar style of murder. So basically, Vladimir had a bee in his bonnet over something that his dad did. I have no idea what it was that his dad did, but he kind of felt like he needed to seek revenge. But instead of shitting in his shoes or just passively aggressively signing him up to dozens of online mailing lists, he decided that murder was kind of the best course of action here. And he lured him down. So Vladimir lived in a house with his dad and his granddad. And his granddad was visually impaired. He was almost completely blind. And yeah, we'll talk about the granddad in a minute. But Vladimir lured his dad down into the basement. And he kind of like shocked him or electrocuted or stunned him with, those cattle prod electrocution stick things? Yeah. He basically kind of caught him off guard with one of those, and that's what originally debilitated him. And then he stabbed him multiple times, right up until the point where he was pretty much teetering on the edge. And then he strung him up upside down over a bucket, and he decapitated him using a scalpel and a shovel. And if you're horrified, then you might want to just fast forward now for a couple of minutes, because this isn't where it ended. So his father has obviously lost his life at this point, but Vladimir's attack is not over. So Vladimir takes his father's decapitated head, and using the scalpel, he removes the skin and the scalp from the head. He washes it, he cures it with some sea salt, and he sews it into a mask. Yeah, a mask. Not just the face on, a face. I mean like the hair, the scalp, the neck, the entire all the way around. You know, at Halloween when you get those pull over your head rubber masks that you can't breathe in, and your breath just creates this insanely uncomfortable layer of condensation inside it that you just feel like you're disgusting and covered in spit. Yeah, this is what he made out of his father's face, scalp, neck, ears, the works. And he puts this mask on himself along with his dad's coat and scarf and hat, and he goes out in public. Yeah, he goes out in public, and he actually tries to pass himself off as his father to his visually impaired grandfather. And his grandfather is obviously like, that's not my son's voice, but he was trying to disguise his voice. So his grandfather was like, what's going on here? And then the grandfather eventually went down into the basement in their house and came across this decapitated body and was like, what the actual fuck is going on? And he freaked out, and he left the house and went to a neighbour's and rang the police and said, I think that I've just found my son's body, and I'm pretty sure my grandson is the culprit here. So yeah, Vladimir was apprehended and arrested. And there are extremely graphic and haunting pictures of what I've just described to you available online, and I could not believe how available they were. I did not actually go looking for them. I didn't intend to ever lay eyes on these images, but I looked up an article, and when I clicked in on it, boom, there it was, right there, 4 pictures, including the mask, and it was so gruesome that it didn't actually seem real. I kind of just felt like I was watching a movie, and I kind of was able to tell myself that's all fake, it's just special effects. So I'm not putting them up, and as you probably realised, I'm not putting up pictures of any of the crimes that I'm talking about today. They're very much readily available, so just Google if you are curious. They're very easy to find, and they leave nothing to the imagination. So if you're squeamish, I would not recommend, because they leave nothing to the imagination. So yeah. Anyway, Vladimir was given 25 years for this crime. And yeah, 25 years and not complete rest of your life with no exceptions. No, he was given 25 years. And just, FYI, that was in and around 25 years ago. So there is a large chance that Vladimir is probably out and about walking among us. But there's not a lot of information, because 5 years into Vladimir's 25-year sentence, he was transferred back to Russia, to a Russian prison. So as you can imagine, it's not as easy to track records when it's not only outside of your country, but there's multiple countries involved. Anyway, Vladimir was kind of fingered as the guy that this had to be the guy that, murdered Kasia, because hello, look at what he did to his dad and look at what's been done to Kasia. Like, way too similar and way too close together time-wise to be a coincidence. But actually, he was ruled out because they said there's just no evidence tying the two incidents together or tying the two people together. And they also kind of reckoned, well, no, he did this specifically to his dad because he had a motive. He wanted to seek revenge on his dad. It's not like he just did this for sport. And I'm sorry, I can't get on board with that. If you are going full Mrs. Doubtfire and wearing somebody's face along with their hat and their scarf and pretending to be them and going out for a coffee as that person, I would strongly argue that it's not just a once-off act of vengeance. It's more likely a proclivity. It's something that's in you. But look, if there's no evidence, there is no evidence. And just to stress once again, there is a lot of blind spots when it comes to publicly available information on this case. There's so much information that I just feel is missing. But suffice to say, the case went cold. Now, further on in about 2012, activity started to pick up again. We had massive advances in forensics and in technology. So look, it was clear that Kasia's case was one of those cases that needed to be reviewed and re-examined. So they exhumed her body and they conducted additional autopsies. And it's just madness. You kind of tend to forget all this time that has gone by. Like, we're going on 13 years since Kasia's remains were recovered from that little tugboat turbine, and the person that did this to her is still out there. They're still going and visiting the local cafe and getting a morning coffee, or picking up a newspaper, or going to the grocery shop, or in the cinema 2 rows behind, the local people of that area. It's insane, it's bonkers, and it would have been so terrifying if you lived around that area at that time. But anyway, I digress. So these additional autopsies and the more advanced technology that we had at our fingertips at that time in 2012 did kind of help to fill in more gaps, not all of the gaps, but more gaps. And it shed more light onto what happened to poor Kasia. And it also gave a greater level of detail, I suppose, to the acts and the crime itself. So they then were able to call in outsiders to assist on more detailed profiling. They called in the FBI, they called in people from the UN, they called in an actual torture expert, like a torture expert. There's another job, can I just say that no matter what it is they're getting paid, it's not enough. And with these experts, they were able to give a much more comprehensive profile of who we are looking for, and more importantly, how we're going to find them. So another 5 years passes, which I know, right? And the longer it goes, the harder it's going to get, because you've just got less to go on and memories become foggier. But anyway, we get to 2017, October 2017 to be exact, and an arrest is finally made. And it's Robert. Do you remember Robert, the local creep? The Robert that was a person of interest back in 1999? Yeah, well, here they are in 2017 and they've arrested Robert now. And this is the point in the story where I start to get very doubtful and very cynical and very tinfoil hat-like. So yeah, Robert, as I said, he was a person of interest way back when. And what that actually meant at the time, I'm unclear on, because they never apparently arrested him. They just got sidetracked with Vladimir. And then when Vladimir was cleared, they never seemed to go back to Robert and look into that any further. So that's kind of the first thing that I struggle with when it comes to this arrest of Robert in 2017. The next thing is that they search his apartment, okay? So they never obviously searched it back at the time, but here they are in 2017 and they search Robert's apartment. And when they search Robert's apartment, they find traces of blood that positively identify as Kasia's blood. Now, this is where I really started to struggle, because it's been 19 years. It has been almost 2 decades since Kasia was abducted, tortured, murdered, and recovered from the Vistula. So how on earth is there still traces of her blood in Robert's apartment? And listen, Robert fit this profile to a T. So I mentioned earlier he was a local creep. He harassed women and he used to spy on them. But apart from that, he also used to work in a morgue and in a zoology centre where they used to preserve and prepare animal skins. So those kind of job titles fit very neatly into the profile of the kind of person that they were looking for. Now, extra fun fact that doesn't really have anything to do with Kasia's murder, but when Robert worked at the zoology centre, he eventually lost that job because one day he came into work and he wasn't in a great mood, and then he killed a bunch of rabbits. And I have no further context for that. He just killed a bunch of rabbits and they had to let him go. And he doesn't remember killing the rabbits or why he was that angry that he felt the need to kill these rabbits. And I imagine in any workplace, killing a bunch of rabbits would be a fireable offence, whether or not rabbits were normally on site or if this was done at the weekend at a local pet shop and it got back to your employer that you had gone in and killed a bunch of rabbits, I imagine you wouldn't be a desirable employee. But all of these things, although gruesome, they were circumstantial. So you're probably wondering, well, if all of these things were true then, why is it that they're only arresting him now and searching his apartment now in 2017? Like, what was the straw here that broke the camel's back? Well, funny you should mention, there was actually something that sparked this arrest and this apartment search. And that was a letter. So there was a letter that was apparently sent to the police by a friend of Robert's. And this letter was incriminating for Robert. It implicated him in Kasia's murder. It included some information that was, not released to the public at large. So it kind of indicated that this person was credible. And it was enough basically to go search the apartment and arrest Robert. Now, what exactly was in this letter, you might ask, other than the vague description I've given you there? Well, it beats me. And if you know, please tell me, because it seems to be like a need to know kind of basis. I imagine this letter would have been included in the full court transcripts. I mean, it would have to be, right? Like, it would have to be if this was what they were basing their entire case and all of their warrants on. But I cannot get my hands on this letter, and I cannot get my hands on the court transcripts. And they're not the only things that were like shrouded in secrecy. So it doesn't seem to just be this letter. The entire trial was very secretive. Like, it was a closed trial. Now, if I hear closed trial, I would just imagine that it's not open for the public to come in and sit and, watch when they're bored and on a day off. But I would still imagine that you would have to publicly publish court transcripts. So again, I will ask if anyone has anywhere that I can go and search for these transcripts. I don't care how many pages they are. I will read them because I am so fascinated as to what the case was that they were able to build against Robert, because it stuck. Robert was not only charged, but he was then later convicted of Kasia's murder and torture and all of the things, and he was given life in prison. And not only that, but it took something like 5 years for them to get through this trial. The judge that was even working on the trial resigned, and they had to wait for a new judge to get caught up and resume the proceedings. And Robert has always denied any, culpability in this. But Robert's dad has kind of come out and defended him and said, like, he didn't do this. He's being kind of implicated in something. He's taken the fall for somebody else. And even Robert's psychiatrist, because Robert was a diagnosed schizophrenic, his psychiatrist even came out and said that he does not believe that Robert did this. So yeah, he may be a rabbit killer, he may be a creep, but did he kill Kasia? Like, that is the most important thing here. Did he actually kill Kasia? It just seems like a very strange sequence of events 20 years after the fact. And look, he got life in prison. He is still in prison serving time for Kasia's murder. And it all seems to have been on foot of this letter, this mysterious letter that came in 20 years after this murder. So yeah, I would love to have a little bit more information on the author of this letter. Of course, during the course of my research this week, I have seen and read some theories on the author of this letter. I've heard some contradicting information from different sources, and of course they all kind of lead me to believe that the author of this letter probably doesn't have very clean hands themselves. So by all means, if anybody out there has ever researched this case or knows anything about this case that I've left out of here, send the stuff my way. Please send me a link. Please tell me where I can go and find more information on this case. Because like I said, it is the thing of nightmares. It is the thing of horror movies. And based on the information and the gaps in information that I had when I was looking at this, I'm not confident that they actually have the right person. But that is our case, guys. That is the case of Katarzyna Zowada. And we are going to be back probably Monday night with another criminal spud. And we're coming right back home to Ireland. I have another Irish case for y'all. So it will be probably, as I said, Monday night. But that is it for now. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you all have a lovely weekend and sweet dreams.